Hi, everybody. I'm Diane Brady. I'm here with Shawn Henry, who's Chief Security Officer of the cybersecurity company CrowdStrike. Shawn, good to see you. I should mention that you founded the security practice and that you retired, I think more than 10 years ago at this point, from the FBI, where you headed up global cyber investigations as well as global criminal investigations, among many other things. So I can't think of a better person to talk to about the threat environment right now. I don't know where to start. We've got rogue AI, espionage, ransomware. What's on your radar?
Well, thanks, Diane. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I've been in this space for more than 25 years, both with the FBI and at CrowdStrike now, almost 12 years. You said 10, almost 12. It's incredible how fast it's gone.
That's right, 2012. You're right.
Yeah, but what's amazing is I get a lot of questions often about from people asking about, what are you looking for? What are predictions for next year? And while there certainly are some newer things, the reality is so much of what we're seeing is what's been going on for 20 plus years in this space. And it's really quite frightening for a lot of reasons. First, because we've not been able to get ahead of it and stop it. And in fact, I don't think we're going to be able to stop ever the access of networks by adversaries, nation states, organized crime groups, hacktivist groups, because the networks continue to get bigger. There's always going to be vulnerabilities in software and hardware that'll be exploited. And the adversaries are getting so much in return from their somewhat limited investment in resources. The ROI is so substantial that they're just motivated to continue, and we can't physically get to the people that are doing this. So this is going on indefinitely. I think that some of the things that we're seeing right now, and then I'll follow up, I think, on 2024 and dig into that a bit. But some of the things we're seeing right now are just the continued exploitation of legacy technology, and it's companies that have invested a lot of money in software and in hardware. They've got relationships with certain vendors, and they've got a sense of stick-to-itiveness to that. But we're still continuing to see the software exploitation that is leading to substantial impact on companies. So,
Do you mean phishing? Give us what?
It is phishing is one way they're exploiting vulnerabilities. I think a lot of the legacy architecture that we're seeing, Microsoft is a good example with a number of zero-day vulnerabilities that have been attacked just in the last year. Over 900 different vulnerabilities and 30 different 0 days in 2022, which were exploited by nation states. And I just think it's important for organizations to focus on shoring up the vulnerabilities that are inherent in the technology they're using if they do continue to use it. I understand in many cases they've invested a lot of money and they've got relationships, but it's really important that we're not shooting ourselves in the foot, that there's a lot that can be done on the front side by companies to help to protect themselves.
So can I just unpack that for one quick second for those who don't know? When you say 0 days, define that for us.
So a 0 day is an exploit that is not known by anybody other than the actors. So an actor has found a vulnerability. It's essentially similar to you find a key to somebody's door, but they don't know that they lost their keys, or they don't know that their lock is broken. And the adversary is going in and out. They've got the ability to glean all the intelligence, the information, and the data that's on that network, and potentially to disrupt that network. So it's especially crippling for companies because they're just not aware that it's there. In some cases, there are known vulnerabilities, and then shame on people for not going and fixing them. That we see that quite a bit as well. But when you've got a 0 day and you've not even had the opportunity to fix it, that's a problem.
And one other clarification of what you've said so far, is Microsoft more prone to this than others? I mean, I just want to clarify the Microsoft reference.
Yeah. Well, look, Microsoft is the most ubiquitous software on the planet, right?
Sure.
It's been around for 35 years. Everybody is using Microsoft to one extent or another. And because of the breadth and depth of their software, how frequently they're being used and how regularly they're being used, it's just by looking at the numbers, it's a small percentage of Microsoft equals a large percentage of vulnerabilities across the entire threat landscape. So it's the number of software products and then the operating system itself. And then this issue about legacy operating systems, there are times when vendors move to another version of an operating system, at some point they stop supporting their old software, meaning they're not putting out patches anymore if there are identified vulnerabilities. And companies that have invested money and they don't want to reinvest in newer software or newer technology, understandably, it's a big expense. But what they're doing is leaving themselves quite vulnerable because the vendor is no longer supporting it. They're not going to help fix it. And at some point, it's going to be exploited. One of the things the adversaries do, Diane, they've got crawlers essentially that are constantly, in an automated way, searching for vulnerabilities on the network, and they know what versions of software are vulnerable. They have the exploits that they're able to use to get through that or bypass that vulnerability. So they're constantly searching in an automated way. So where many times we see companies that are targeted specifically because of who they are. For example, we know that China is interested in energy, or China is interested in high tech.
Yeah.
Specifically targeting those types of companies. But using these search protocols and these automated vulnerability finders, you might just be a victim because of the software you're running, where an organized crime group is looking to deploy ransomware. So, companies need to understand that while they might not be targeted specifically, they absolutely can be the victim of an opportunistic attack.
You mentioned automation. Of course, with automation, it sort of pivots over to the new tools we have. And I think less about prevention and more about containment, perhaps, or flagging alerts. How has AI changed the picture on both fronts, the attacked and the attackers?
Yeah, great question. So, first of all, we've been using AI for more than a decade at CrowdStrike, and I'll talk about that in a minute. I think that for the average person, the concept of AI is really brought about because of the recent kind of proliferation of generative AI, where the average person can go and make a query, ask a very structured question, and get a pretty complex response back that would take hours or days to do the research to pull it together. And generative AI is helping to automate that and to make it much, much faster. But the use of AI, essentially the ability to go through large swaths of data, has been around for a long time. We've used it because we use it to identify anomalous activity in behavior patterns of people. So for example, if we know that a particular user logs in Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, and these are the type of tasks or applications that they're typically using, that's expected behavior. But if we see somebody who is now logging in at 2 a.m. on a Saturday morning, and they're going to applications they've never touched before, or they're taking, they're elevating their access, this is unexpected behavior, anomalous behavior, and it would indicate that there's a problem there. So AI essentially is used to look at large swaths of data over a very compressed time, and for a defender, it's of great value. Unfortunately, we're seeing adversaries that are able to use generative AI to craft malware, and people who are less sophisticated than some of the actors that we've seen over the last decade or so that are able to get into the hacking game because AI has provided them as a tool the ability to augment their skill set, their limited skill set.
So more amateurs getting into the system, what would be the net result?
Well, more bad people trying to access your system. When you look at as a security professional, you're trying to defend networks. You need to know who the adversaries are, what are the vulnerabilities you're going to exploit, what's the impact that you're going to have. Those are some of the considerations you make when you try to identify risk to your enterprise. If you've got more actors that are getting involved and they're looking at vulnerabilities, perhaps different than the type of vulnerabilities that a nation state might look at, it's just an added risk into your environment. Tie that to, you mentioned phishing earlier. It's still, it's a relatively easy type of an attack, but it's still one of the most significant types of attacks that we see because it still works.
Yeah.
So AI, adversaries can craft very believable emails. I think historically, one of the things security professionals would say is when you're looking at an email, look for bad spelling or poor grammar.
The email address.
Yeah, well, the email address is certainly one of the areas, but the crafting of the message itself, because oftentimes non-native English speakers are utilizing email to launch their malware. Well, now you can have people who don't speak English well or at all, and they're able to craft a message that looks like it's been prepared by a native speaker. So it's just become much more believable and much more of a concern, I think, because of the capabilities of AI and new people getting into the space because they recognize they can make a lot of money.
So, Shawn, I want to ask about the external versus internal, and I mean that on a country border point of view. We often hear about, hackers that are somewhere in Eastern Europe, somewhere in Russia, somewhere in China. Do you have any sense as to how many of the threats are coming from outside the U.S. versus inside? I don't even know if it frankly makes a difference, but I am curious if you've noticed any change in that respect.
Well, it does make a difference. It makes a difference because the actors are going to continue to come after the networks until they're physically stopped.
Mm-hmm.
And when you've got actors that are operating outside the confines of the US, from a nation like Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, the US government is not going to have the capability to actually stop those people from launching these attacks because they're protected from the government. We don't have extradition treaties. We don't have
supported by the government sometimes too, obviously, right?
Sorry?
So oftentimes supported by the four that you mentioned.
100%. And oftentimes it is the government of the other nation, and of course they're not going to hand over members of their own intelligence community. From a defensive perspective, I don't know that it matters because the attack is the attack. It's important, I think, for network defenders to understand who's attacking them because you might identify certain tactics or procedures that they're using. It might help you better detect the adversary. It might help you looking forward. It might allow you to be more proactive to find an adversary before they launch an attack if you know who they are. And oftentimes that's associated with their geolocation. If it's a Russian actor or a Chinese actor, they're typically going after different types of things within the environment. They have different intelligence requirements that are guiding them on the networks to target and the intelligence or the data on that network to target. So in terms of percentages, I think that the majority of what we're seeing is still external actors, but there certainly are actors domestically inside the United States, organized crime groups and others that are targeting companies for a large financial gain through ransomware and extortion and other types of economic attacks.
Do you think as we head into an election year, are we better prepared to handle any sort of digital espionage in essence or attacks in terms of the elections that will be taking place?
I think we're better off in that we know about it. I think that the companies and individuals are aware of it. I still think that networks are vulnerable and the system itself is potentially vulnerable because of how it's structured. I also believe that on the heels of 2016 and to a lesser extent 2020, that there are more adversary groups that are aware of the impact of those prior attacks And again, the more people that you get into the space, the more actors that are trying to get through your front door or climb up through a window, the bigger opportunity there is for a vulnerability to be exploited and to have some type of an impact. So, the electoral process, the election system in the US is widely dispersed, and there are a lot of different parts of the system. It's not centralized. So there are a lot of different parts of the system that can be targeted, whether it be the election rolls, the registrants, maybe it's where data is collected, maybe it's in the reporting process, maybe it's targeting the media that's reporting something so that it impacts people. And then on the front side of the election process, this whole concept of misinformation and disinformation, where we know for a fact that nation states are putting out information in the United States specifically to create chaos, to sow division, to cause people to question their fellow Americans, to create this divisiveness, and to put out information about certain candidates. And I think when we go back to the AI question and the ability to manipulate data, the ability to manipulate audio and video. I think that is going to be used as part of the seeding of social media in advance of the election to try and persuade people to vote one way or the other. The last thing I'll mention, Diane, because I think it's really important as it relates to the elections, 2024, there are going to be dozens of elections around the world in democracies, and the US is not the only nation being targeted. We know that the election systems have been targeted previously in France and in Germany, in Israel. Those nations have come forward and talked about it. Germany, another one, they've been public what their intelligence services have identified. And when I think about, I mentioned the big four actors: Russia, China, Iran, North Korea. While the United States is certainly in their crosshairs as likely their biggest adversary, certainly
not the only one.
They're not the only one.
Let me, I know we have to sum up, but let me ask you another few very quick questions. One is, if I were to hand you a wand, Shawn, and you could wave it, what would you change in that respect to actually make societies less vulnerable to these actors right now? Obviously, public education, in fact, we're discussing it now, but is there anything, any levers that could be pulled that are not being at the moment?
Well, there are certainly quite a few, and it would be a comprehensive process. There's no single point of failure. It's a whole continuum. I would say it would start with certainly the awareness level. You mentioned education; that's critically important. And then next to that is this whole piece about shoring up your infrastructure internally. So you should have the best technology. Because the most current technology is going to be less vulnerable to attackers. You need to have the right security technology in place that helps you identify this anomalous behavior. That's critically important. You have to have the right processes and policies, and you have to have the right leadership in the company, where not only do they recognize this is an issue, that this is a risk, but they're willing to invest time and energy and money to protect their assets and to protect their customers, their data, their employees. That's really, really important. And then I guess, I go back to this concept of actors that are operating in a place where they can't be touched. So they operate with impunity, and it goes on indefinitely. I think that there's going to have to be a much more direct and specific conversation, nation state to nation state, about what's acceptable and what's not. And what the consequences are if you cross one of those red lines. We've seen adversaries targeting critical infrastructure like water and electric power. And, in the physical world, in the kinetic world, there are certain requirements and certain processes for assuring those things don't get targeted. I think you have to see the same thing in the digital world.
Yeah. Well, I look forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you for raising our awareness of some of the issues, obviously many more to come, and appreciate your time. Look forward to speaking to you in the new year.
Thanks, Diane. I really appreciate it. Safe and happy New Year to you.
Thank you.